that you have probably read or not read, but I'm glad that you are here tonight. And to everyone on Zoom, thank you so much for joining us. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for the evening. Are you all ready to get started? Woo! Awesome. So Dr. Victoria Farris is a lifelong New Yorker on a mission to facilitate a more inclusive world. She is a disruptor, a truth teller, and a justice seeker, working to shine light onto the truths that can be hard to recognize. Her research focuses on understanding from the perspectives of folks of color what white people can do to disrupt and dismantle systems of racism. And Victoria has developed a framework for effective allyship that outlines an action-based guide for disrupting racism on individual, group, and organizational levels. That's some hard work. Victoria is also an activist, coach, hypnotherapist, doula, trainee, mom, and devoted practitioner to mindfulness. She loves to play in the intersections of personal development, healing, wellness, and systemic oppression, and serves both individual clients as a coach and healer, and organizations as a facilitator and consultant. Victoria also co-hosts the Reconnecting with Pleasure podcast, where she talks about cultivating a pleasure-centered lifestyle as a form of resistance and liberation. She loves to have critical conversations, pull oracle cards, and continue to find ways to facilitate healing so we can all experience more liberation. Victoria spent over a dozen years working in higher education prior to launching her consulting and coaching business in 2017. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Marist College, a master's in higher education and student affairs from the University of Connecticut, and a doctorate in higher education management from the University of Pennsylvania, where she earned double distinction for her dissertation research on disrupting racism. Welcome, Dr. Farris.
Awkward to have that read, and I wrote it, and it still feels awkward to have it read, but thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. That's me, I'm Victoria. I didn't think to bring any oracle cards with me, but as that was getting read, I'm like, I feel like you all would have been the group that would have been down for me to pull a card at the beginning. I see your thumbs up. I'm sorry, I forgot. Next time, let's do this again. How are you all? Woo! Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, this is going to be interactive. And here's your word of warning. I have 4 children at home, 3 of whom are teenagers. I am very good at asking questions multiple times until I get the enthusiastic response I'm desiring, okay? Thank you. There you go. Good job. All right. Welcome to this conversation, to this symposium, Standing on Business. I'm delighted to be here. And also, I'm very aware that we're here for a social justice symposium on standing your business. And this nice white lady just walked up on the stage. That's me. Hi. But yeah, we're going to jump right in, okay? All right. So first, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to raise your hand nice and high, if you're willing, please, if you have ever experienced a microaggression on or around campus. Could be based on any aspect of your identity, your gender expression, your race, your religion, your ability, pronouns, access. All right, I want you to look around. If you're willing, raise your hand and take a look around, okay? I see a good number of hands here. Thank you so much for indulging me. Friends, this is why we're here. 100%. 100% of the folks that I interviewed when I was collecting my dissertation research, it's folks of color who worked on university and college campuses across this country. 100% of them expressed that they have experienced microaggressions on their college or university campus in every part of this country, the big schools, the small schools, all the schools in between, including the very nice small liberal arts colleges in really lovely inclusive communities not unlike this one. 100%. Yeah, and you all saw how many of you raised your hands that you're experiencing them right here. Right? That's why we're here. You know how many of those institutions that the folks I talked to where they work, the colleges and universities that they work at, you know how many of those institutions have some type of value statement or mission statement about equity and inclusion? Thank you, 100%, all of them. Right, and I bet you all have one here, don't you? And yet, 100% and all those hands in this room, and that's why we're here. Okay? I have notes so I don't ramble too much, but I'll try to stay off my soapbox this morning. Okay, so I want to hear from you. I'm going to ask you, if you want to raise your hand, please, but if you want to just shout out, stand up. I don't have a lot of rules. I'm a disruptor. But I want to hear from you. What does it mean to stand on business? That's the theme of this year's symposium, right? What does it mean?
Momo over here knows the answer.
Challenge by choice, friends. Challenge by choice. Come on. I told you I'll keep asking the question until somebody gives me the answer.
Literally or metaphorically?
However you want to answer it. That was a very brilliant response. Thank you. Tell me, what does it mean to you?
Well, I was imagining a piece of paper that said business and then like someone standing on it, but I imagine that's not the response we were looking for.
Listen, I tell my children often that I desire the answer that they have, not the one that they think that I want, and that is one of the most brilliant answers I ever got. I don't know if you heard them, they said they imagined like a piece of paper that says business and just standing right on it. That's a very literal interpretation. I'm here for it. What else does it mean? Okay.
Standing firm in your beliefs and your values even when it might be difficult or there might be obstacles in the way, and just being certain that like you know that you're doing the right thing and continuing to do it.
Excellent. I'm going to try to summarize so that the folks on the stream can hear on the microphone. Tell me if I get it right though. Standing firm even when things are tough and staying certain in that firmness of standing in your principles. Did I do an okay job? Thank you so much. Who else? What else? Standing on business. I see your hand, yeah.
Being stubborn?
Being stubborn, yes. Sometimes it means being stubborn, I think, but maybe that's just how I rationalize my stubbornness. Anyone else want to add in? Okay, I have a funny story real quick because I have a business coach who is this really, really lovely white lady who's in Ireland. So she's Irish, her US context is, she doesn't have one, right? She lives in Ireland, she's Irish. And so I tell her, I'm going to give this talk, I'm going to keynote this social justice symposium. She said, what's the topic? I said, this year their theme is standing on business. And she kind of gave me the look that told me she didn't quite understand what I was saying. And I was like, well, it's a saying and this is what it means. And she slowly just smiled and then full on laughed and said, isn't it ironic, with her lovely Irish accent, that you're going there to talk about standing on business as it relates to equity and inclusion, and here I am constantly getting you to try to be accountable for standing on your actual business. It was rude, and also true. Okay, so I went to the very academic resource of Urban Dictionary. Thank you very much. But let's see what Urban Dictionary says about stand on business. To take care of your business and obligations, to be about your grind. Rent was due, my son was hungry, so I had no choice but to stand on business. I want to know what just happened over there. Basically, to me, it means doing what you say you're going to do. Yeah? It's about doing what you say you're going to do. And I think that we're here because sometimes we forget to do what we say we're going to do. Because sometimes it's easy to talk about what we want to be about, but it can be a lot harder to actually be about it. Can you all agree? Yeah. I think about New Year's resolutions sometimes. But tell me from your perspective as members of this community, why do you think we are having this particular conversation on this campus this year in this moment? The election. Thank you. Why else? I know the answer. You all know the answer. You live here. I'm just visiting. Why are we having this conversation in this place, in this moment? Do you think there's room for us collectively and individually to improve on how we stand on our business? I see some nods. Do you think there's room individually and collectively for us to improve on doing and putting into practice the values that we have in our mission statements and in our good, kind hearts? Yeah. I'm a believer that we can't shift or change what we can't name. And of course, James Baldwin said it best. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So my friends, we have to name what's happening on this campus, in this community, in this country, and around this world. We have to face it, even if it's uncomfortable or painful or hard. So I'm going to name it, okay? Talking about equity and inclusion is easy. Stating values about liberation and justice is easy. Flooding the streets after George Floyd's murder was still kind of pretty easy. Reading books and joining book clubs, I hosted some. Again, still pretty easy. Having abstract ideas of an anti-racist society based on those books is, frankly, still on the easy side of things, because when it comes to putting those things into practice, many of us are woefully unprepared. 4 years after George Floyd's murder, we have more cops and a bigger military budget and policing budgets across this country than we did in 2020. 4 years later, we have watched as students and their encampments were bulldozed off of campuses across the country. 4 years later, and we are collectively being called to stand on our business. Are we about liberation or not? Because we said we were, didn't we? Okay, let's be real. This is especially important for folks who look like me, because the more privilege we have in our identity and our life, the harder it can be to recognize the ways that we need to adapt and change to create the world we say we want to live in. My life doesn't depend on the world changing, but so many others do. So, what do we do now? Today, I'm going to share with you 3 primary things that I think can help us individually and collectively stand on business. One is self-inquiry and accountability. So what does that look like? What I mean is being really honest with ourselves about how we can simultaneously claim Black Lives Matter and then inflate our policing budgets across the country, or continue to call the cops at the hint of a conflict. Make sense? You with me? All right. So why do I think this happens, and how did we get here? To me, I think a lot of it happens when we're growing up and the messages we receive. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. That's me with the little flower crown. Cute, right? Listen, my parents were awesome. They talked to me about all kinds of stuff in the 80s and 90s. Yes, I'm that old. That most other folks weren't talking about, especially with their kids. And I feel tremendously grateful for that. I remember my parents so clearly when I was in elementary school talking to me and my sister about the AIDS epidemic. They talked to us about the lies we were going to hear and the fear-mongering about gay and queer people, and assured us that we should never be afraid of gay people. They told us, they armed us really with the truth and facts in a time where there was a lot of hysteria. I met my first trans person about the same time. I think I was about 10. And again, my parents sat my sister and I down. They explained to us what this person's identity was about. Again, assuring us there's nothing wrong with being trans. There's nothing weird about this person, and we treat everyone with dignity and respect. Cool. Until I noticed that we were at this family's house and this person was there, and every time she left the room, the trans woman who was there, some of the adults would make remarks or snicker or do things that didn't seem to me to be terribly respectful. And no one said anything. When we were visiting my family down in Tennessee for the first time, I heard the N-word floating around freely and casually as if it was perfectly normal, and I was horrified. Mostly because every time I heard it, I looked up and my parents didn't say anything. We left and we got in the car, and it was just my sister and I and my parents again, and I turned around in the car after they closed the doors and they said, "Girls, nobody should ever speak that way. They are racist and that's not okay." Basically, the message that I took away was they were bad because they spoke like that, and we were good because we knew better. Does that make sense? Who can relate? I see a few little hands. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because the message that many of us get when we're kids is that our goodness is tied to our thoughts and our values, not to our actions. And that's how we end up inside institutions that espouse values of equity and inclusion, while every day Black, brown, indigenous, disabled, trans, queer students, faculty, and staff experience microaggressions on campus and around campus. That's how we got here. Right? Nice, kind people who smile and care about us, but stay quiet in critical moments. Again, as Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. We have to interrogate our own value systems and what we were taught implicitly and explicitly about how to live into our values. Because just like I watched my parents stand quietly while people said things that I knew they didn't believe and agree with, is it not any different than when I quietly unfriend people or walk past situations or witness microaggressions right in front of me or participate and don't say anything. Because I love the idea of liberation in practice, but I don't know how to live in a world that doesn't center my comfort. And that's where we got to start. So, I'd like you to take a moment. How often do you get to pull out your devices? Maybe that's regular, I don't know, I'm kind of old now. But do me a favor and pull up this QR code. Instead of having you have to use your voices, we use our devices for a moment here. I'd like you to jot down, it should prompt you with individual, like 5 different slots to put words in. I'd like you to share 3 to 5 of your primary values. Just put each word or phrase per one per box. Does that make sense of what you're looking at? Is it working? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm like, set this technology up and just hope for the best out here. Okay, so, oh, there we go. Great. So they're going to pop up here as they come through. So 3 to 5. I really want to challenge you to do more than just one. 3 to 5 values that are primary values for you, things that you aspire to in life. I see honesty, support, compassion, critical thinking, expression, courage, loyalty, adventure. These are so good. Open-mindedness, happiness, creation, family, joy, peace, listening, anti-capitalism. Oh, gosh, you guys are cool. Care, success, compassion, faith, business, freedom. Right on. You see this? These are your collective values. So the ones here in the middle are the ones that get repeated. So loyalty, kindness, honesty, freedom, peace, support. Those ones are a little bit more common. Thank you so much for sharing them. And now what I'd like you to do is to take a couple of moments and just reflect on how well are you living into these values? How well are you demonstrating that these are your values in your daily life? How well are you living into these values in your daily life? And now I want you to take a moment and reflect on what are the things that most often get in the way? You know, again, my business coach who likes to call me out, you know, she asked me recently about my values, and the first thing I said was integrity. And she said, great, how do you live into that? Do you always do what you say you're gonna do? And I was like, well, damn it, no. Sometimes I tell people, I'll have that email to you by the end of the day tomorrow. And I live in an ADHD world where that means nothing tomorrow. And suddenly it's been 3 extra days and it's not there in time. And she's like, well, how do you say you live in integrity when you don't do what you say you're going to do? And so then I ask myself this same question of what gets in the way? Well, sometimes it's just so hard. Sometimes I'm too tired and I'm too stressed. Some days I just don't know how. Sometimes it's because I'm really scared of what might happen, especially when it comes to topics of equity and inclusion. Yeah. These are great. Thank you all. So it looks like a lot of us can relate to feeling too tired or stressed. That goes back to that anti-capitalist value before. I aspire for all of us to feel less tired and stressed. Other things that aren't listed here, and because I'm scared of the consequences. Who can relate? Sometimes the consequences of really standing on our business can feel really daunting. Thank you so much. Now, who wants to share their lovely voice in the room and share a little reflection, what makes it hard to live into your values? It's a very vulnerable question. Thank you.
One of my values is expression, and I think what makes that hard sometimes is that in order to express, you have to allow yourself the space to express and often create spaces for yourself to express, which can be difficult.
Yes, thank you so much. So they shared that a value is expression, but in order to really live into that, it takes creating space both to kind of create your expression and also space to exist in spaces with that expression. Did I summarize that okay? That was beautiful, thank you. Anybody else want to share? Yeah.
I don't know my values, is the issue.
Who can relate? They said, I don't know my values. But I mean, I regularly, I'm like, am I? What do I think that's wonderful reflection. I appreciate you sharing it. I don't know if you could see, but several other folks raised their hands. You're not alone there. And this is a great opportunity then for you to start to think about that. Especially as you go through the symposium and the sessions tomorrow, right? What are my values? It's a great reflection, and they're allowed to change, right? We are allowed to evolve. Anybody else have thoughts or reflections you'd like to share? If I don't see your hand, shout for me. Yeah, thank you.
I think for me, even as an administrator, I think what scares me the most is the consequences, because you want to say something, you want to do something, but then you're in this weird place where you have these values as an individual, but you have this responsibility as an employee. And like to the students in the room, the older you get, this becomes more and more complicated, right? Like there are times, and my supervisor's in here, so he knows I'm telling the truth. There are times where my position conflicts with my personal beliefs, and I just have to take a plunge and say, like, I don't agree with that, regardless of what the consequence is. But when you weigh certain things, I'll follow up and say, you know what, I probably shouldn't have said that. I'm so sorry. But then I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, I had to say this. But it's scary because as you get older, your job's tied to your financial well-being, you know, your housing and all these other things that you're risking by taking a stance towards something or by even enacting on your morals. So I think for me, it's like opportunities where I have to weigh whether or not this is really worth the risk, right? Like, is this really worth the possibility of someone, retaliating against me? Is this really worth me putting my job on the line? Like, how much of my identity is worth me even sacrificing myself for this conversation or this moment? And so it's a constant battle of wanting to make sure that I'm still safe, even though the situation I'm putting myself in doesn't really allow me to do that.
Thank you. Could you all hear Sarah? It is increasingly, I don't want to say that. That implies a change. Depending on your circumstances and situations, the consequences shift and change. And just like maybe for queer kids in the room, queer young people, like when you were young and thinking about coming out to your family, right? Like I was constantly weighing that out. What might happen? What am I willing to give up to be who I am, to express myself, right? Your point about your value of expression, something you're always thinking about, right? What are the consequences? What happens? And then sometimes it's tied to your job. Sometimes it's tied to a class, right? Maybe if you know a grade is tied to something and you're like, well, I don't know, if I say this, what might happen? These are important conversations to reflect on and being strategic around. Thank you so much. Other thoughts, questions, or reflections? What makes it hard? Yeah.
I guess this kind of falls under consequences, but social judgment. Because you can, like, standing on business, to do that, you kind of, like, you have to, there's so many different perspectives, and no matter what you say, somebody will get offended. There is nothing you can say that won't hurt anyone. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to figure out, like, how to be the most effective.
Absolutely. The spirit of what you said, if I get this right, is the social impacts. Yeah, that it's near impossible to please everyone, and so making strategic choices about what you share and when you share, and the risk you take at hurting some at the expense of expressing your values. Is that a fair way to? Who can relate there? Every time I open Instagram, I'm like, well, the other day I posted something, and some people did not like it. Beautiful, thank you, and you bring me right along to my next point, number 2. Do it afraid and with others. How do we take these observations, the reflections that we're having about ourselves and our values, and move them towards action? We have to build the muscle of doing it afraid and getting in community, because together, bravery is so much easier to come by. Have you noticed that? When there's a couple of you doing the same thing that's kind of vulnerable or tricky, if you feel a little bit more brave than when you're just doing it alone? Yeah. Okay, so this started for me about 13 years ago, actually, when my mom got sick. And so it doesn't make sense necessarily how this relates, but I promise that it does. I was 30 years old. I was a perfectly nice white lady living in New York City, espousing lovely values about equity and inclusion and living a life that was steeped in perfectionism. I was definitely wearing a mask most of the time, but everything was wonderful. It was my baby's first birthday, and I planned the perfect birthday party. I got this great little picnic theme. I had a Pinterest board. I ordered all the decorations so they matched the theme really perfectly, and I was so excited. And then as I was getting things set up for his party, we were in Central Park, and my mom came over and tried to help put the little like toppers on cupcakes. You know how they put like little decorations in the cupcakes? And she picked them up and starts like popping them into the cupcakes, and I literally shouted, "No, stop! You're doing them all wrong. Just let me do it." And I yelled at my mom, and so she just walked away, because I would have done the same thing if I were her. And I went back to making sure that everything was perfect. Now, to be fair, it was real cute. But the reason that this story was so important is because at the beginning of this party, as everyone was arriving, I yelled at my mom, and I chose perfection over connection and inviting her in. And at the end of the party, as everyone was leaving, my mom came up and said, "Honey, can we go take a walk? There's something we have to talk about." And as we walked down a path in Central Park that afternoon, my mom told me that she had been diagnosed with bladder cancer the day before. You know what didn't matter anymore? The fucking cupcake toppers. I hope I was allowed to say that word. In the moment, we were super optimistic that she was going to get better and everything was going to be okay, but the reality is that that was the last birthday party of any of her grandbabies that my mom ever attended, and she died 9 months later. It was a moment of such contrast for me, and I think a lot of times we can learn the most significant lessons from moments of contrast. because it showed me that no matter how perfect everything was, you can't stop people from dying. And instead of letting my mom help me and having a really cute moment together that I could remember today, it's like the day that we celebrated my baby, I yelled at my mom and chose perfection over connection. And that was a moment that I realized that my values were out of alignment. I had been trying so hard to be good that I was hiding behind a mask of goodness and good enoughness and perfectionism. And you know what I decided? I don't want to be good anymore. I want to be real. I want to be human. I want to be messy. I want to be imperfect. I want to try too hard. I want to curse too much. I want to fall down. I want to get back up. I want to try again. I just want to be real. And so many things started to shift and the dominoes began to tumble after that, because it really highlighted the start for me that you can't change what you can't name, and I was living out of alignment. It starts with us. So I want us to practice. I told you I was going to make you hang out and participate a little bit, so this is your 1-minute warning. I'm going to ask you to actually get up even out of your seat if you want to move around a little bit, and I want you to find a person, a buddy, somebody that you can chat with. Yes, you can pick the person next to you, but have some fun and like move around. It's nice to stretch your legs. So I want you to find a buddy, and we're going to do a little exercise just for a couple of minutes. So go ahead and find a buddy first, and then I'll tell you the next step as we go. Oh, I'd love to see some of you getting up and moving around. Thank you. Yes, okay. Do we have a buddy? If you see someone around you who doesn't have a buddy, loop them in. It's okay if there's 3 of you. Excellent. All right. First, I want you to just take a moment. Maybe you know each other really well. Maybe you don't. Either way, I want you to take a moment and take a deep breath, and I want you to ask each other and then answer with authenticity. How are you really? Not the like, oh, how are you? I'm good, how are you? Right? I want you to answer really. You know, I didn't sleep so good last night, so I'm a little tired, more tired than I would like to be, and I had a paper that I was up late doing. I want you to be honest, okay? So take a breath and take turns asking each other, how are you really? And answer honestly. Remember, we're choosing authenticity over perfection. How are you? All right, can I get you just for a moment to tell you the next thing we're going to do? All right, thank you. Okay, so hopefully you shared how you are. If you didn't, you could finish that in just a moment. Please finish that. And then the next thing we're going to do is practice active listening, right? And witnessing and accountability. It's a little bit of a dance we're going to do. And so this might be a no-brainer for some of you, but I think it's really important to name things, right? So I'm going to set some context. What we're not going to do is tell people, like, make people feel better, try to answer their problems for them, try to fix things, yeah? What we are going to do is listen and say things like, oh, I hear that. Thank you for telling me that. And if it feels true to you, you might say, I can really relate. I've felt that way this other time. Which is not the same as saying, I know exactly how you feel, because, baby, we don't know how each other feels. But we can often relate to how each other feels. And it can be a really powerful moment of connection to say, I can really relate to that. Make sense? So no fixing. No, oh, that's not so bad, right? Our job isn't to make each other feel better, because we feel better when we get witnessed and supported. Make sense? Okay, and now we're going to practice a little bit of accountability. I want you to take turns sharing a time recently where you didn't stand on business, where maybe your actions did not align with your values, okay? And I'm going to go first, because I don't believe in asking you to do things I'm not willing to do, and also buys you 30 seconds to think about it. The other day, I was standing outside of one of my kids' sports practices, and I was sitting like a little bit away, because, you know, they're at that age where if I'm too close, I am in big trouble. But I was sort of maybe like 10 feet away, and I heard one of the other kids throwing around the word gay in a really derogatory manner. And I tightened up everything in my body, and I took a moment, and I didn't say anything. Because I knew that my kid would probably feel really embarrassed and be upset with me if I had interrupted in that moment. And I chose his comfort over the potential harm of any queer kids or humans around who may have been hearing that language and made it mean something about them. I did not stand in my values in that moment. Make sense? What we're doing here? Okay, so take a moment. You guys can decide who wants to go first and share something that came up recently and practice just listening and validating. I appreciate you sharing. Thank you so much. Go. One more minute, so if you haven't both taken a turn yet. All right. Go ahead and finish up your thoughts for me. If you didn't already, thank your buddy for being a good listener. Thank your buddy for sharing, for being vulnerable. Awesome. And now I'd love to hear some of your reflections. Please don't share what your buddy just shared with you, because that would not be your story to tell. But I would love to hear how the experience was to practice, kind of having to say it out loud or hearing it out loud from somebody else or having to really think about an example. How was that? Yeah. Say it again, I'm sorry. It was okay. All right, you can relate. It was all right. Good, thank you. Who else? How was that? Yeah.
It was hard to get started, but once I got into what I was sharing, it was sort of surprisingly easy to then keep going forward. So I think the starting was the hardest part.
Starting was the hardest part, but once you got going, it was surprisingly easier. Is that fair summary? Who can relate to that? Yeah, I definitely can. Thank you. The reason that I asked you to do this is almost exactly that. It is very difficult to get started, and it is very healing to get there and to be able to share and have someone say, oh, I hear you, or I can relate. I was in this white accountability space the other day for other white folks who do equity work, and somebody shared really, really vulnerably about their own internalized racism and a specific experience with their family. And I found as I was listening, I was so moved just listening to this other person's story. And I didn't joke right away, but I joked, after we finished the conversation. Every time a white person owns and names their internalized racism to another white person, like an angel gets her wings, like the whole world reverberates. And I don't just mean that this was a white accountability space, but I'm talking about when a cis person names their transphobia to another cis person or an able-bodied person around their ableism or sexism, fill in the blank. We all have privileged identities where we hold bias against folks whose identities are marginalized. Yeah, you're with me when I'm saying that, right? And I really do think that sometimes the simple act of taking that first hard step to then be able to share and have somebody just receive it, not fix it, not tell you you're still good, just receive it, really does have this tremendous impact overall. Because if we collectively were all doing that as a part of our regular practice, I do think that would be enough for the world to change and more little fairies would have their wings. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to share reflection, what that was like? Yeah.
I wish I had more time.
Oh, more time.
That was sort of a lovely cutoff.
I'm the worst when I do that. I get you talking on something you really want to talk about, and then you start talking, and then I'm like, okay, stop. It's even worse on Zoom because then I pull you right out of those groups. Who can relate they wish they had more time? I see a bunch of hands. Here's what I want to offer you, friends. You have time because you all share this community. And I think that is the perfect loving invitation to say to the person you just spoke with, can we get a snack during a break tomorrow? Or can we sit together for lunch? Or can I meet you before the first session? And can we finish this conversation? This is how we cultivate community. If you want to stay where you are, please do. If you want to go back to your seats, please do that too. I don't like rules, even though my kids think I have a lot of them. Okay. So I'm going to continue telling a little bit about my own story because I'm going to cut to 5 years later. It was 2016. I think we all remember what happened in 2016 politically. And yes, I was one of those people who was totally shocked that this country would elect Donald Trump because my whiteness continues to show. But you may recall that shortly after Trump took office as president, he began a new policy at the southern border separating families. Do you all remember, at least loosely, his family separation policy? Yes. Okay. Excuse me. And so sorry. It was not long after that policy went into place. I think it was the spring of 2018. And there was an audio recording that got leaked of a little human that I would have guessed was about 6 or 7 years old, and their little voice crying for their grown-ups. Do you remember any of you hearing that audio? It still haunts me. Because at the time I had a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I heard their little voices and this little voice of a person who is not so different from my own children, except that he was born in a different country to different family, and something shifted in me. It still haunts me. I can still hear the voice. It really got me in a deep way, because I knew then without a shadow of a doubt that there was no circumstance under which someone would take my 6 and 8-year-old away from me ever. I could have gotten pulled over drunk driving with my kids in the backseat of the car, and I would have guaranteed you that they would have found somebody who loved my kids, that they were safe with, to take them up while they took me to jail. They would never have just put my kids in a little detention center separated from me. And the fact that this was happening to families who were not so different from mine except for the country of their birth and origin just really ate at me, and it kept me awake at night. And one night I was laying there and I couldn't sleep, and I picked up my phone and I started to scroll, and there was an email from the Women's March from Linda Sarsour. Do y'all know who Linda Sarsour is? She is an extraordinary activist, and at the time was one of the co-founders or the co-presidents, I don't know what their title was, but she co-led the Women's March. And the email said, "It's time to put our bodies on the line to stand with and for immigrant families and protest the family separation policy." And as soon as I read it, I filled out a form and I said yes. I said yes that I'd come to DC. I said yes that I would put my body on the line, my very white, very privileged, very feminine body, and that yes, I'd be willing to risk arrest by engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience. And truthfully, I was shaking as I did that, and I wasn't actually sure I'd follow through on this thing that I was saying, but it was the middle of the night and I just felt brave or tired or something. And when I woke up in the morning, I thought maybe that didn't actually happen and I was dreaming, but I checked my email and it was there and I had done it. And so about a week later, I took adventure to DC all alone. I live in New York, so it's about a 5-hour, 4-hour train ride. And I was so scared. But the organizers of the event had hoped that there would be other folks like me who were showing up for the first time to engage in this type of activism, and they organized an event the day before to do some training and like preparation, and I was so grateful. And so when I arrived at this church where the introduction and the training was going to be, I was awkward and alone, and I kind of like crept up next to this group of like a couple of other women, and they were like, "Oh, just join us," and suddenly I felt a little more okay. And the organizers talked about why we're here and inspired us, and then they offered a training. This is Linda Sarsour, and she inspired me. I actually posted this on my socials that night. I want to be able to look at my great-grandchildren in the eye and tell them that I stood up and I wasn't afraid. And that moved me and inspired me. And then after Linda, another activist, Lisa Fithian, got up and she did a training on civil disobedience. And this was another pivotal moment for me. So I don't know about y'all, but like I didn't grow up around parents who were doing civil disobedience. Like this was an idea that I'd read about in books, but not something I'd ever really been up close to. So I was very nervous and listening very carefully to the training. And Lisa asked us to pause and think about the ways that we were conditioned to respond when we saw police. And I thought about how in my nice white suburban family, you know, we were really taught to always obey the police and to listen to what they said and to, you know, follow their directives. And then she invited us to think about what we do when we get scared or how we react when we're afraid, imploring us to understand and be aware of our reactions so that we could respond not from those reactive places, but from a really calm and grounded and aligned place. Because the key to engaging in civil disobedience is to stay completely calm and nonviolent, even when you're scared or angry or provoked. And so then Lisa said something to the effect of, white supremacy keeps us quiet and following the rules. But tomorrow, when you start to feel scared or anxious that the police are coming, I want you to take a breath and remember that everything you do is your choice. You can choose to get up and walk away at any time and do what the police tell you to do. But if you want to risk arrest, then remember that you are choosing to use your body and your voice, for justice. Every time, even when I repeat it back, I was like, oh, gets me. And Lisa was absolutely right. The next day, thousands of women took to the street for a protest through DC, and then we marched to the Hart Senate building, that's where this is, and over 600 of us, mostly white women, sat down in the middle of the foyer at the Hart Senate building and took the choice to risk arrest. As Lisa predicted, the first time I saw the police come in, I got so anxious and I felt like, oh my gosh, I was supposed to just get up and walk away and be a good girl. And I remembered what she said and I took a breath and I reminded myself of her words. I was choosing to risk arrest because I was choosing to put my body on the line and use it for justice. And I can tell you that in that moment, I had never felt more powerful. And that's because there wasn't anyone to have to exert power over. It was something from inside of me and inside of all of the people around me to be in a community, a sea of people who are making the same choice to simply sit down and use our words was extraordinarily powerful for me. But the other thing that happened that day is my kids, who were 6 and 8 at the time, were watching on a live stream and accidentally saw their mom getting arrested. Because this was from the live stream, they sent me this picture, because as I was sitting there, I got a text that said, the kids just saw the police come in and they asked me if you're gonna get arrested, what should I tell them? I wasn't expecting that part, and so I said, tell them that I'm okay, that I'm not scared, that I'm brave, and in an hour, you tell them that I am okay, even if you haven't heard from me yet, you just lie to the children and tell them, like, mommy's fine, okay? And that's what we did. And later that evening, when I got out of processing, so they take you after you get arrested, they put us in zip ties, and they brought us all together, and then a few hours later, they sent us out with a fine. And as I was leaving, one of my sons called me, and he said, Mom, did you get arrested? And I did what any good mother would do, which was try to avoid the question at all costs. And I just talked about, how was your day? And then he, my little Libra baby who loves justice, said, Mom, did you get arrested or not? And so I said, well, honey, yes, I got arrested. What did you do? And I said, well, I got arrested for using my voice. And he said, what? That's so stupid. No one should get arrested for using their voice. And I knew I was doing something right. But then he told me that if I didn't get actual handcuffed with metal handcuffs and put in jail, it didn't count. So it didn't count. It was, though, a full circle moment back to that training and Linda Sarsar's words about what we could tell our children. Friends, what I learned that day was that when I showed up afraid and found a community, I felt more brave and more powerful than I ever had before. And together we made a huge impact. I think there was something like 6 senators who came down and spoke to us. Several of them were arrested with us. And we got national media attention and people started talking about this family separation policy that hadn't been before. I wish I could say that it was all better and it's not still a problem, unfortunately. The story doesn't go quite like that, but it still mattered. Now, the point of this talk is not to tell you all to go get arrested, but if you want to talk about that, we can totally talk about that after. But it is to say that there were so many different people who played so many different roles in this moment and in all of the other moments, right? There were organizers, folks who coordinated transportation, folks who helped feed us before and after the action, folks who secured permits and spaces for our training and places to sleep, people who raised money to help pay our bail fines, folks who watched our kids so we could be there, folks who took photos, who did interviews, who wrote press releases, who engaged on social media, folks who observed, folks who helped translate, and who supported activists with disabilities, folks who coordinated to ensure that they knew each and every one of us who got arrested and stayed right outside the processing facility until the very last of us came out. And each of them contributed to this event, and each of us did what we could and brought what we had and the knowledge that could be useful to have a collective impact. And for me, to be honest, it was kind of the easy part because my body is a privileged body and the risk was low. And so I did what I could, and that's what I invite you to do, is to leverage your resources. Think about what you can do, how you can do it. Several months after that protest, Donald Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, and many of the organizers, I saw your head shake, thank you. Many of the activists and organizers that I met in DC were organizing again, this time to disrupt and protest the nomination hearings, or the confirmation hearings, which were being forced through in a way that personally I did not feel had integrity in the values of a democracy. But my participation in those hearing protests would have fallen during my kids' first week of school, and that felt like an important thing to talk over with them. And so I sat my kids down, and my kids are awesome, and as soon as I talked to them, they said, "Mom, you need to go." They didn't care that it meant that I wouldn't be home when they got home from school on their first day. But then we watched some video of the first day of the hearings and what was happening, and I could see them start to tense up as we were watching. Because it's one thing to have your mom talk to you about what might happen in the hearing room, and it was another thing to see it happening. And so I paused the video for a moment. I said, "Do you feel scared?" And they were like, "Yes." So I said, "How about we watch the video all the way through and then we'll talk about it." I'm going to share, not the exact same video. Oh dear, I'm doing the wrong thing here, excuse me. Not the same video, but a portion of the same video.
Roosevelt's decision. Justice Jackson's.
Ask him to suspend.
I had a case called Hamdan versus United States. Who's Hamdan?
So this wasn't the exact video that we watched, but it highlighted many of the same moments. This was from the first day of the hearings. And I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked my kids at the end, which is, what did you notice? Is that a hand raise? Okay. What did you notice? Oh, thank you.
A couple things. First of all, the guy speaking went quiet when they were yelling, but he also kind of looked a little bored. He was stepping, he was like, "Not again."
Yeah, so he got quiet, and then he looked a little bored and was drinking his water. They actually had like memes and things making fun of how often he was drinking his water during that moment. But yes, thank you. Anybody else? What else did you notice? I'm going to tell you, oh, tell me.
They got press. The press was right on the women, so you got the word out.
There was a lot of press. This is one of those photos, images. Yep. I'm going to tell you what my kids noticed. Again, we didn't see the exact same video. It's hard to find the same ones now, but my kids said at the end, "Mom, the police were way worse when they were arresting the black women than the white ones. Is that why you want to go?" Yes, baby. That's why I want to go. And that's what this third point is about. It's learning, taking what you've learned about your self-inquiry and accountability, you're doing it afraid, and figuring out how you can best be of service. use what we have when we can, how we can, in order to play a role. And so I, again, took my very privileged body to Washington, D.C. This image is my friend Deborah Harris, and she was actually in the video that the kids saw, and there were 3 police officers dragging her out of that hearing room. And it was scary to watch, and I get why. I think it was scary to be Deborah. She is an incredibly fierce and brave activist. But when I went to DC and it was my turn, one officer took me by the elbow and escorted me out of the room. I was arrested 7 times during those confirmation hearings, and I am almost embarrassed to share with you how kindly I was treated by police officers. I knowingly volunteered to do something that I knew was against the law, knowing that the police were watching, understanding what was going to happen, and I had one police officer actually apologize to me for arresting me out of a sit-in in a senator's office. That is not everybody's experience, as we can see one example right here. So, to be clear, am I always standing on business? Absolutely not. I am an imperfect human, and there are plenty of times where I get stuck or complacent or just plain lazy, and plenty of other times where my privilege or lack of understanding gets in the way of my integrity. But my goal is to strive towards consistently paying attention and taking action, big and small, as often as possible. Because what I know is that when you stand on your business and I stand on mine, there is an impact every day, and not just on the big days where something like this happens. And it's not just on the day of the protest. In fact, I would argue that it's all the days before that make an even bigger impact. I live in a historically very blue, democratic area. I live right outside New York City. And just this past year, they enacted a ban on trans girls playing sports in my county. I have a trans femme daughter, teenager at home, and this ban will potentially impact her. Now, as an aside, her school was freaking awesome, and they said she can play whatever sport she wants, and if we have to have her back, then we'll do it. But that's a side point. The thing that I know is that that ban did not happen overnight. It happened over time. Slow and intentional transphobic propaganda was seeped into our community and stoked the fear of people who didn't understand. And real talk, I would guess that a lot of folks that I know, folks who show up at Pride, folks who call themselves allies, folks who love our daughter and who love our family and other families like ours, heard lots of transphobic rhetoric and rolled their eyes or said nothing or blocked someone on socials or walked away. They did not stand on business of being an ally to the queer community and call people in and disrupt these narratives or take any action. And to be honest, those are the actions that would have been more effective and impactful than showing up at the protest after the ban was enacted. Follow? Standing on business is not just the glory and the rush of a protest. And I love the glory and the rush of a protest. But it is about the profound discomfort of those moments when we have to risk our jobs or our social relationships and all the things y'all talked about at the beginning, right? We have to make uncomfortable decisions. What am I actually willing to do here? What am I willing to say? But folks didn't quiet the transphobic rhetoric or even just try to add to it. Even if it's not countering a point, maybe you add something that just expands another person's way of thinking. They quietly sat at home thinking they were good allies because they came to Pride and they had queer friends. And then the county passed the legislation, and then the protests were organized, and you know what? We didn't go to the protest. And here's why, and this is important. Part of our daughter's liberation comes with her not having to constantly protest her own right to exist in a world where her vitriol will follow her everywhere. Part of her liberation is being able to sit at home and play a game with her family. Yeah? And that's why standing on business means showing up in community for folks and with folks whose identities are different than ours. Because when I show up to a protest for Black lives or Palestinian lives, or to protest for healthcare or bodily autonomy, Black folks and Palestinian folks and folks with disabilities and multiple health conditions get to stay home and rest if they want to. They can decide if they want to be in the streets or in their homes loving their families. And standing on business means making choices to give something up in order for others to have more. Make sense? Solidarity isn't only when we're arm in arm. A lot of times it's that we build trust and rapport, showing folks that we will show up consistently and take action. Ideally, so we don't need to get to a protest because we've already disrupted the narratives before the bill gets passed. But that we will show up to the protest or the strike when it doesn't. So I ask you, this part's important, where the rubber meets the road, what are you willing to do to stand on business? I've done a lot of research around allyship, and the thing that I say most often is that allyship has consequences. Standing on business has consequences. What are you willing to do to live into your values? I want you to really think for a moment, and I'd like you to make mental note or jot them down, okay? And my homework to you, even though I hate homework, but I won't be here to grade it. My homework to you, my call to action is that throughout the next day, throughout the symposium tomorrow and the rest of your evening, you find a person, maybe somebody in this room, and you ask if you could chat with them about your commitments. And you share, these are the commitments. You know, at the end of Victoria's talk, she asked us what we were willing to do, what commitments we were willing to make. Can I share with you, and can we support each other? And share your commitments with somebody, either that you already trust or somebody that you want to be in community with, and let them share theirs with you. Because it's like New Year's resolutions. If I decide I'm going to the gym every single day, but I don't tell anybody I'm going to do it, it's going to be way harder than when I sit down with my partner and my family and my babysitter and my kids, and I say, okay, y'all, this is the thing I'm going to do, so I need you to do this and you to do this, right? They help and support. I would never pretend I'm going to go to the gym every single day. I don't even know where that came from, but you understand what I'm trying to say here. Right? When we share with each other, we can help each other live into our values and commitments. And that's my homework or invitation to you all. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Neither is liberation or justice or equality. Standing on business means having skin in the game. It has consequences, and it is an action. And most importantly, it is an action that comes from a place of love and humanity. We're not standing on our business when we're responding to the people that we want to hate. We're standing on our business when we're aligned with the people that we love or want to love. So, what actions are you willing to take? I'm going to have you pop them into this thing. Here we go. Look, I know how to do this. Okay. So pull that phone back out. What actions are you going to take today, this week, this year, on your campus, in your community, and with your families? I know, sometimes you want to leave them out of these conversations. I very lovingly get told regularly, Victoria, when you come to, that's her choice too, nothing. Victoria, when you come to dinner on Saturday, can you please not talk about politics and this and that? And I have learned to respond and say, if the racists at the table don't say anything racist, then I promise I won't have to interrupt it. They've come to tolerate it. Call people out, talk to people, speak my mind even when it's hard. Be chill, yes, okay, facilitate discussion, create space for expression, organize peers, pray, listen. Yes, these are beautiful. These are beautiful. Thank you. Use my art as a tool for social change. Decide on an action and do it even if it seems small. Always better than doing nothing. Yes, transition. I don't know. That's okay if you don't know right now. Just think about it. Thank you so much for sharing these, and truly, I would invite you to have a conversation, find a friend, make a new friend, get in community together, take an action together, and know that even if the first step is wrestling with your own stuff, what's getting in the way, you're taking action and you're making an impact. And with that, if you would like some resources, I have a handout that has all kinds of resources. I think if I move this to the next page, there's a place, you don't have to do it right now, there's a quick little survey and you can pop in your email address for me and I will send you a packet with lots of tools about how to disrupt conversations and engage in conversations. And I would love to hear your thoughts. And I am so grateful for you all for being here and for having me. Thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Farris?
My email address is also up here if you want to email me your questions. No questions.